Welcome to my channel. Here, we share inspiring stories of brave and strong people. Maybe you'll see yourself or someone you know in these stories. Thank you for watching. The town of Falcon Creek had always been a peaceful place, nestled quietly in the hills of Pennsylvania. But that peace shattered the moment the Iron Fangs roared into town. Their leader, Deacon Razorcross, wasn't here to sightsee. He was here to send a message. What the gang didn't expect was Emma Sullivan and her blind father, Peter, calmly having breakfast at Connie's diner, unfazed by their threats. When Razor mocked Peter's disability, Emma gave a warning that froze the entire diner. "You've picked the wrong people today." But what could a single woman possibly do against a gang like this? The town of Falcon Creek woke slowly each morning, its streets quiet as the sun climbed over the distant ridgeline. Nestled among rolling hills, the town was a place where time seemed to stretch, where life followed a steady rhythm known to its residents. At the heart of it all stood Connie's Diner, a staple of the community. Its vintage neon sign flickered faintly as the regulars trickled in for their morning coffee. Inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon wafted through the air, creating a comforting atmosphere. Emma Sullivan guided her father, Peter, through the door, her hand lightly resting on his arm. They were well known to everyone there. Peter, though blind, carried himself with the upright posture of the Marine veteran he was. His injury, a lasting result of an IED attack, had robbed him of his sight but not his dignity. Emma, ever watchful, steered him toward their usual booth by the window. "Morning, Emma." "Morning, Peter." Connie greeted them warmly from behind the counter. She wiped her hands on a towel before pouring 2 mugs of coffee and setting them on their table. "Morning, Connie." Peter replied with a polite nod. His voice was steady and calm, commanding attention without effort. Emma smiled politely as she helped her father settle into the seat. She scanned the diner with a subtle but practiced sweep of her eyes. Years of military training never truly left her. She noted the positions of the other patrons, the exits, and the way the morning sunlight highlighted the wear and tear on the diner's floor. Though the scene was peaceful, her instincts never allowed her to fully relax. Peter chuckled softly as if sensing her vigilance. "You're still on high alert, Emma." "Force of habit," she replied quietly, stirring a bit of sugar into her coffee. "Doesn't hurt to stay aware." Their conversation drifted into lighter topics, news from around town. The veteran shelter Peter wanted Emma to visit more often. The warmth of their interaction masked the underlying vigilance Emma carried with her every day. Peter was her responsibility now, and she took that role as seriously as any mission she'd undertaken in the past. The door to the diner swung open again, letting in a cool breeze. Emma's eyes narrowed as she heard it, a low, distant rumble like the growl of thunder far off on the horizon. It was faint but unmistakable. Motorcycle engines. At first, it was just a background hum, barely noticeable beneath the clinking of silverware and murmured conversations. But as the seconds passed, the sound grew louder, the rumble intensifying. It wasn't just 1 or 2 bikes, it was a pack. The regulars in the diner began to shift in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. The atmosphere in the room shifted from calm to tense, like a taut wire ready to snap. Some of the patrons whispered quietly to one another. Emma's gaze hardened. She could already guess who was coming. The Iron Fangs, a motorcycle gang notorious in the surrounding counties, had a reputation for causing trouble. Led by Deacon Razorcross, they were known for their intimidation tactics, extortion schemes, and violent outbursts. Their presence in Falcon Creek wasn't a common occurrence. But when they did show up, it was never a good sign. The rumble grew louder, drowning out the quiet buzz of conversation. Within moments, the motorcycles pulled into view, their chrome frames glinting in the sunlight. They parked in a line outside the diner, engines roaring before cutting off in unison. The abrupt silence that followed was more unsettling than the noise had been. "They're here," muttered one of the patrons near the window, his voice hushed and uneasy. Emma's jaw tightened as she reached for her father's hand. "Stay calm, Dad. Let's see what they want." "I'm calm," Peter assured her, his expression unreadable behind his dark glasses. "It's not the first time I've dealt with bullies." The diner door swung open forcefully, and Razor Cross strode in, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face hardened by years of violence and arrogance. His leather jacket, emblazoned with the Iron Fangs insignia, announced his authority. Several of his gang members followed close behind, their eyes scanning the room like predators sizing up prey. The chatter in the diner ceased entirely. Connie froze behind the counter, her hand gripping a coffee pot as though it were a lifeline. Razor smirked at the sudden silence, clearly enjoying the fear his presence commanded. Well, Razor drawled, his voice carrying an air of smug superiority. "Looks like we stumbled into a friendly little gathering." Emma remained seated, her gaze steady as she watched Razor. She noted his movements, the way his gang spread out to occupy different parts of the diner. It was a tactic meant to intimidate, to make everyone feel surrounded. But she didn't flinch. Peter, sensing the tension, adjusted his posture slightly. "Morning," he greeted Razor with calm civility. Razor's smirk widened as he approached their table. He leaned forward, resting one hand on the edge of the booth. "Morning." "Huh. Well, aren't you polite?" He tilted his head, studying Peter's face. "What's with the shades? You hiding something?" Emma's grip on her coffee mug tightened, but she kept her voice level. "He's not hiding anything. My father's blind." For a moment, Razor appeared caught off guard, but he quickly recovered. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Blind? Huh. That's tough. Guess it's good you've got your daughter to lead you around like a little dog." A tense silence fell over the diner. Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly hoping to avoid being drawn into the confrontation. Connie's face paled as she set the coffee pot down, her hands trembling slightly. Peter remained unfazed, his expression composed. "I don't need anyone to lead me," he replied evenly. "And I've dealt with worse than you." Razor's grin faltered briefly, but he covered it with a forced laugh. "Worse than me? You've got guts, old man. I'll give you that." Emma spoke before Razor could continue. Her voice was calm but carried an edge that cut through the room like a blade. "You've picked the wrong people today." Razor turned his attention to her, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Emma didn't move, didn't blink. She simply held his gaze with a quiet, unyielding intensity. The tension in the room thickened, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Razor seemed momentarily unsure of how to proceed, caught off guard by the sheer composure of the two people before him. Outside, the motorcycles gleamed under the rising sun, a reminder of the power Razor thought he held. But inside the diner, something shifted, an invisible line drawn in the sand. The calm before the storm was over. Falcon Creek was about to change. Deacon Razor Cross stood silently for a moment, sizing him up. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by a woman who showed no sign of fear. The gang leader straightened, his smirk tightening into something more predatory. Around him, The Iron Fangs began spreading out, subtly taking control of the diner's space. One leaned against the counter near Connie, eyeing her uneasily, while another slid into a booth, his boots resting on the seat opposite him. "So," Razor finally said, his voice low and amused. "You think you're tough? Huh? What makes you think you can talk to me like that?" Emma kept her composure, her gaze steady and cool. She didn't move, didn't flinch under his glare. "This isn't about toughness," she said evenly. "It's about respect. You walked in here trying to intimidate people who've done nothing to you. That doesn't fly with me." Razor chuckled, shaking his head. "Respect? You think you're in a position to talk to me about respect? Let me explain how things work. See, when my boys and I show up, we take what we want. That's just how it is. But maybe you didn't get the memo." His voice grew harder, the playful edge vanishing. He leaned forward slightly, invading her space. "So, how about you and your old man sit there quietly while we grab a bite to eat?" Peter broke the silence before Emma could respond. "You've made your point, Razor," he said calmly, using the gang leader's name deliberately. "Now, why don't you order your food and let the rest of these people enjoy their breakfast?" The mention of his name clearly irritated Razor. He stiffened and turned his head toward Peter. "You don't get to tell me what to do, old man," he snapped. "You don't even know where you're sitting." Emma's jaw clenched as she saw Connie flinch behind the counter. Other patrons stared at their plates or their coffee cups, clearly hoping to avoid being noticed. Razor was pushing for a reaction, trying to assert control. "I know exactly where I am," Peter replied, his voice still calm but firm. "And I know bullies when I hear them." The words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a razor's edge. For a moment, Razor didn't speak. His expression hardened, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Bullies? Huh," he repeated quietly. "Is that what you think we are?" Emma decided it was time to shift the balance. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Razor's. "We don't think. We know." The quiet challenge in her voice hit harder than any raised tone could have. Razor took a step back, as if reassessing the situation. One of his gang members, a wiry man with a scar running down his jaw, muttered something under his breath. Razor shot him a warning glance before turning back to Emma. "You've got guts," Razor said after a pause. "I'll give you that. But guts won't get you far with us." Emma tilted her head slightly. "We'll see about that." The gang leader stared at her for a long moment before chuckling under his breath. "Fine," he said, stepping back fully now. "Let's not get all worked up just yet. We'll grab some food and be on our way. No need to make this harder than it has to be." He gestured to his gang, who slowly began to ease up, though the tension in the air didn't dissipate entirely. Razor walked over to the counter, pulling out a menu as though this were any other visit to a diner. He grinned at Connie, who struggled to maintain her composure. "Coffee. Black," he ordered curtly. Connie nodded quickly, retrieving a mug and filling it with shaking hands. Emma kept her eyes on Razor, watching his every movement. His attempt at playing it cool didn't fool her. This wasn't over, he was testing them, seeing how far he could push. Behind her, Peter spoke softly. "Emma, be ready." "I am," she replied quietly, her eyes not leaving Razor. She could feel the tension in the room like static electricity, crackling just beneath the surface. The gang members weren't settled, they were restless, itching for trouble. As Connie handed Razor his coffee, he grabbed it without looking at her, instead glancing back at Emma and Peter's booth. You know, he began conversationally. A town like this, it's got potential. Friendly folks. Quiet streets. The kind of place where people don't ask too many questions. Maybe that's why it doesn't need you around. Peter said evenly. The gang members nearby chuckled darkly. Razor raised an eyebrow. Is that right? He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving Peter's face. You've got a lot to say for a blind man. Peter didn't react to the jab. Being blind doesn't mean I can't see who you really are. The chuckling died down, replaced by a tense silence. Razor's smirk faltered briefly before he forced it back. He set the coffee down harder than necessary on the counter, the sound echoing in the room. Big words. Razor muttered. He shook his head and chuckled again, though the sound was more forced this time. You've got some fire. I can respect that. But fire has a way of burning out. Emma stood abruptly, causing several gang members to tense up. She moved slowly, deliberately, standing between her father and Razor. She met Razor's gaze with an icy stare. I think we're done here, she said calmly. You've had your fun. Time to move on. Razor's eyes narrowed. For a moment, it seemed like he might push things further. But then he smiled, a cold, calculated expression. Sure. We'll move on. For now. He signaled to his gang, who reluctantly began making their way toward the exit. Razor took his time finishing his coffee, savoring each sip as though to draw out the tension. Finally, he set the mug down and turned back to Emma. You've got guts, he repeated quietly. But guts only get you so far. Emma didn't respond. She simply stood her ground, unflinching. Razor chuckled one last time before turning and walking out the door, his gang following behind him. The roar of motorcycle engines soon filled the air again as they mounted their bikes and pulled away from the diner. Inside, the silence stretched on for several moments before Connie finally exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. Thank God, she whispered. Peter leaned back slightly in his seat. They'll be back, he said softly. I know, Emma replied, her voice steady. But next time, they won't get to walk away so easily. Outside, the roar of the Iron Fangs faded into the distance. But the storm they had brought with them lingered in the air, an unspoken promise of what was to come. Emma stood outside the diner, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the empty street. The distant sound of the Iron Fangs' motorcycles had faded, but the weight of their presence lingered in the cool morning air. She exhaled slowly, steadying her thoughts. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Razor would return. And he wouldn't come alone. She couldn't afford to wait for that to happen. Her hand reached into the pocket of her jacket, retrieving a secure satellite phone. This wasn't the type of device most people carried around. Emma had kept it for situations exactly like this. The connection was encrypted, and it linked directly to people she trusted. People who understood the kind of threat they were facing. Without hesitation, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The line clicked twice before a gravelly voice answered. This is Calloway. Grant, Emma said, her voice low but firm. I need to cash in that favor you owe me. There was a brief pause on the other end. When Grant spoke again, his tone was sharper, more focused. Emma? It's been a while. What's going on? Emma glanced back at the diner through the window. Peter was sitting calmly in their booth, but she knew he was listening for any sign of trouble. She turned away and spoke quickly. Trouble. Motorcycle gang, the Iron Fangs, led by a guy named Deacon Cross. They're trying to strong-arm Falcon Creek. Cross, Grant muttered, as though the name rang a distant bell. You need local authorities on this? Emma shook her head. Even though he couldn't see her. No. They'll just escalate. I need a show of strength. Something that'll make them think twice about coming back. Grant let out a low chuckle. Sounds like old times. You calling in the cavalry? Exactly. Emma confirmed. Can you rally the team? Already on it, he replied. There was the sound of movement on the other end, Grant giving orders to someone nearby. Where are you? Connie's diner. Downtown. Emma said. It's quiet now. But they'll be back. Probably with reinforcements. Grant's voice shifted. Taking on a no-nonsense tone she remembered well from their missions overseas. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Sit tight. Captain. Hearing her old rank sent a wave of both nostalgia and resolve through Emma. She hadn't worn the uniform in years. But moments like this reminded her that some parts of her past never truly left. Understood, she said simply before ending the call. Emma lowered the phone. Her mind racing through possible scenarios. She trusted Grant and the people he would bring with him. They were all veterans. Men and women who had seen combat and knew how to handle situations like this. Still, she had to be ready for anything. The morning sun reflected off the diner's windows as Emma pocketed the phone and stood silently for a moment. She could hear the faint sounds of the town slowly coming to life, cars in the distance. The chatter of pedestrians. Falcon Creek was a quiet, peaceful place. And she intended to keep it that way. But that peace came with a price, complacency. The townspeople weren't prepared for the kind of threat the Iron Fangs posed. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Kandahar. To the mission that had forged the bond between her and Grant. His team had been pinned down in a deadly ambush. Surrounded and outnumbered. It had taken every ounce of strategy and courage to pull them out alive. In the aftermath, Grant had promised her that if she ever needed him, he'd be there. Now, that promise was about to be tested. Emma sighed softly and turned toward the diner, ready to rejoin her father. Inside, the atmosphere remained tense, though the gang's absence had allowed the patrons to relax slightly. Connie was back at the counter, her hands still trembling as she refilled coffee mugs. A few regulars whispered among themselves, casting nervous glances toward the door. Peter turned his head slightly as Emma walked back in. His senses were keen despite his blindness. Everything handled, he asked quietly. For now, Emma replied, sliding into the booth across from him. Reinforcements are on the way. Peter nodded thoughtfully. You called Calloway? Emma's expression softened. Yeah. He'll be here soon. Good. Peter said. We'll need every bit of leverage we can get. People like Razor thrive on fear. If they sense weakness, they'll never let this town rest. Emma glanced around the diner, noting the wary expressions of the other patrons. Falcon Creek's residents were good people. But they weren't fighters. They didn't know how to stand up to organized intimidation. That was where she and the veterans came in. They could show the town what real strength looked like, strength built on unity, discipline, and courage. Don't worry, Emma said, her voice low but resolute. We've got this. Peter tilted his head slightly, listening to the subtle shift in her tone. He smiled faintly. I know you do. You always have. Emma let his words sink in for a moment before glancing out the window again. The street was quiet for now. But she knew that wouldn't last. The Iron Fangs weren't the type to let a perceived challenge go unanswered. Razor would regroup. Maybe bring more men. Thinking he could overwhelm them with numbers. He wouldn't be expecting what was coming. Emma took a deep breath, centering herself. The call had been made. Now it was just a matter of waiting. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the cavalry arrived. 10 minutes until the balance of power shifted. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the promise of a confrontation yet to come. Emma was ready for it. She had faced worse. Inside Connie's diner, the tension hadn't entirely dissipated. Conversations were muted, and the clinking of dishes sounded louder than usual in the uneasy silence. Most of the regulars avoided eye contact with each other, their faces showing the same question: were the Iron Fangs really gone? Or would they be back? Peter Sullivan sat calmly in his booth, his hands resting lightly on the table. Outwardly, he seemed unbothered, but his mind was working through the situation with quiet calculation. He knew Razor and his gang wouldn't let things end here. Men like that thrived on intimidation and control. If you challenged them, they'd always come back harder, needing to reassert dominance. Peter's thoughts turned to his daughter. Emma had taken on responsibilities far beyond what anyone her age should have to bear. After he lost his sight, she had been the one to shoulder the burden of their new reality, always protecting him while suppressing her own fears. The war may have been over for her, but some battles followed you home. Peter understood that all too well. Emma returned to the diner, her boots clicking softly on the worn floor as she approached their booth. She moved with quiet confidence, the tension in her shoulders subtly easing now that she had made the call for reinforcements. Peter turned his head slightly in her direction as she sat down across from him. "They'll be here soon," Emma said quietly. Peter nodded. "Good. We'll need them." Connie approached their table hesitantly, wringing a dish towel between her hands. "Emma, honey, are you sure everything's going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Shouldn't we call the sheriff?" Emma shook her head. "It's under control, Connie. Trust me." "But these bikers," Connie stammered. "They've got a reputation. If they come back, they will." Emma interrupted gently. "But by the time they do, they'll realize they made a mistake coming here." Connie bit her lip, clearly wanting to press further but deciding against it. She nodded reluctantly and returned to the counter, where a few other patrons murmured quietly. Emma could feel their nervous glances in her direction. They didn't understand what was coming, and that was fine. The less they knew about the reinforcements, the better. For now, all she needed was for them to stay calm and trust that she had a plan. Peter leaned forward slightly. "You didn't tell them everything, did you?" Emma met his gaze, though she knew he couldn't see her expression. "They don't need to know the details." "Not yet." Peter smiled faintly. "You always were good at keeping your cards close to your chest. Learn from the best." Emma replied with a smirk. A moment of quiet passed between them, a rare pocket of peace amid the building storm. Outside, the streets of Falcon Creek remained still, the calm deceptive in its serenity. But Emma's senses remained heightened, attuned to the slightest changes. She knew what to listen for, and soon enough, she heard it. A low, distant rumble began to creep into the background noise. Faint at first but unmistakable. It wasn't the chaotic roar of the Iron Fangs motorcycles. This sound was steady, disciplined, like a drumbeat growing stronger with each passing second. Emma's posture straightened instinctively, and she exchanged a glance with Peter. "They're here," she said softly. The sound grew louder, drawing the attention of the other patrons. Several people turned toward the diner's front windows, their curiosity piqued. A few even rose from their seats to get a better look. Emma remained seated, her gaze fixed on the entrance. Peter tilted his head, listening carefully. "That's not Razor's crew," he remarked. "No," Emma confirmed. "These are the good guys." Outside, a line of motorcycles rolled into view, each bike gleaming under the morning sun. The riders moved in perfect formation, their engines synchronized in a way that spoke of discipline and experience. They wore leather jackets adorned with military patches, their presence exuding quiet authority. There was no need for theatrics, they didn't need to intimidate anyone. Their very presence was enough to command respect. The lead rider, a tall man with a salt and pepper beard and a no-nonsense expression, dismounted and removed his helmet. Major Grant Calloway. He surveyed the street with a practiced eye, taking in every detail before signaling to his team. The other riders followed suit, dismounting with calm precision. Inside the diner, whispers broke out among the patrons. "Who are they?" someone muttered. "Military. Maybe," another suggested, eyeing the patches on the riders' jackets. Emma stood and made her way to the door, pushing it open just as Calloway approached. He nodded to her, his expression softening slightly. "Captain," he greeted, using her old rank out of respect. "Major," Emma replied with a nod. "Good timing. You said 10 minutes. Calloway said, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We don't mess around." Emma chuckled softly. "I can see that." The two shared a brief moment of camaraderie before turning their attention to the task at hand. Calloway gestured toward the diner. "Everyone in there holding up okay?" "For now," Emma answered. "But Razor's going to come back with reinforcements. He'll want to make an example of this town." Calloway's expression darkened. "Not on our watch. We'll set up a perimeter. Make sure they know they're not in charge anymore." Emma crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "This isn't just about defending the town. We need to show them there's a line they can't cross. They've been pushing people around for too long." "Understood," Calloway said. He glanced back at his team, who were already spreading out along the street. "We'll take care of it." Emma nodded. The plan was in motion. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself a small measure of relief. The cavalry had arrived, and now it was time to show the Iron Fangs what real strength looked like. The synchronized rumble of motorcycles echoed through Falcon Creek streets as the veteran riders rolled in. Unlike the chaotic roar of the Iron Fangs, these bikes moved in perfect formation, their engines idling with a low, steady growl. The riders, led by Major Grant Calloway, dismounted methodically, each person taking up a position without needing instruction. Years of military discipline were evident in their every movement. They spread out across the street, standing silently but watchfully, their presence exuding quiet authority. Emma stood near the entrance of Connie's diner, observing as Grant's team established control over the area. Some riders secured the road's perimeter, blocking any potential escape routes, while others positioned themselves near key points like the town square. Falcon Creek's residents peered from behind curtains and doorways, curiosity and confusion etched on their faces. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd, questions mingling with awe at the sight of the well-organized group. "Who are these guys?" someone murmured from across the street. "Military. Maybe," another voice replied. Emma crossed her arms, feeling a sense of reassurance. The veterans knew exactly what they were doing, and their presence was already changing the atmosphere of the town. People who had been paralyzed by fear hours earlier now watched with cautious hope. Emma knew this was only the beginning. Razor and the Iron Fangs wouldn't back down without a fight, at least not without one last attempt to assert dominance. She didn't have to wait long. The distant roar of approaching engines signaled Razor's return. The sound grew louder with each passing second. The gang's arrival announced like a storm rolling in. Emma stepped forward slightly, her expression hardening as she spotted the Iron Fangs rounding a corner and cruising toward the diner. The gang members appeared confident, their leader at the front of the pack. But that confidence faltered as they took in the sight before them. Razor slowed his bike, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the street. The disciplined line of veteran riders surrounding the area was an unexpected obstacle. His gang members began to hesitate, their bikes weaving slightly as they exchanged uncertain glances. The atmosphere had changed dramatically since their last visit, and it was clear they weren't prepared for what awaited them. Razor revved his engine once, a symbolic gesture meant to reassert control. The sound echoed through the town square, but the veterans remained unflinching. Their silence spoke louder than any threat. Slowly, Razor pulled his bike to a stop in the middle of the street, dismounting with deliberate movements. His gang followed suit, though their movements were less coordinated. Some of them shifted uneasily, their bravado wavering under the weight of the veteran's presence. Emma stepped forward to meet Razor head-on. Major Calloway walked beside her, his eyes sharp and unreadable. The two of them made a striking contrast to Razor's chaotic energy. The gang leader's expression hardened as he watched them approach, his jaw tightening in defiance. Well, Razor drawled, forcing a smirk onto his face. Looks like the welcoming committee's grown a little bigger. You expecting company, Emma? Emma didn't flinch at his use of her name. It's not company. It's security. Razor chuckled darkly, shaking his head. Security. Huh. Is that what you call this parade? Looks more like a bunch of old war stories trying to relive their glory days. Grant's calm voice cut through the tension. You're standing on thin ice. Cross. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Razor's eyes flicked toward Grant, sizing him up. And who might you be? Another tough guy looking to play soldier? Major Grant Calloway. Grant replied evenly, his tone neither hostile nor friendly. United States Army. Retired. The title alone gave Razor pause. He glanced over his shoulder at his gang, some of whom were visibly less confident than before. Razor wasn't entirely ignorant of military hierarchy, and the presence of a decorated officer wasn't something he could brush off so easily. Emma seized the opportunity to press the advantage. You walked in here thinking you could scare a small town into submission. That's not happening anymore. Razor's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. Is that right? You think a bunch of veterans are gonna scare us off? We're not here to scare you, Grant said quietly. We're here to stop you from making a mistake you can't take back. The gang leader's bravado slipped further as he took in the silent, watchful presence of the veterans surrounding him. These weren't ordinary civilians, they were people who had seen combat, who understood discipline and strategy. The Iron Fangs, by contrast, operated on fear and chaos, tactics that were suddenly ineffective in the face of such calm resolve. Emma stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Razor. This is your chance to walk away, she said firmly. You don't want this fight. Trust me. For a brief moment, Razor hesitated. He could feel the shift in power dynamics, the unspoken realization that he was no longer in control. The veterans weren't posturing or making empty threats, they didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to convey the reality of the situation. But Razor wasn't ready to back down entirely. He straightened his posture, forcing a defiant grin. You think you're so tough, don't you? We'll see how long that lasts. Emma's gaze didn't waver. We're not the ones who need to prove anything. The words hung in the air, a final reminder that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Razor could feel the weight of those words pressing down on him. Around him, his gang members fidgeted nervously, clearly questioning their leader's next move. Razor clenched his jaw, knowing that any wrong step from here would only deepen his humiliation. Without another word, Razor turned back toward his bike. His gang hesitated, unsure whether to follow, but his sharp glare spurred them into action. They mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life. Razor shot one last glare at Emma and Grant before revving his bike and speeding away, his gang trailing behind him like shadows. As the Iron Fangs disappeared into the distance, the veterans held their ground, their expressions unchanged. The confrontation had ended without violence, but the message was clear: Falcon Creek was no longer a place to be intimidated. Emma exhaled slowly, her gaze lingering on the road where Razor had vanished. "They'll be back," Grant muttered beside her. "I know," Emma replied. "But next time, they'll know exactly who they're dealing with." The air in Falcon Creek remained tense despite Razor's departure. The veterans maintained their positions, calmly watching the road. No one relaxed. This wasn't over yet. And both Emma and Grant knew that Razor wouldn't simply walk away without trying to regain control. It was a matter of time before he regrouped and returned. For now, the message had been sent: the gang was not dealing with helpless civilians anymore. Grant adjusted the sleeves of his jacket and glanced toward Emma. "You know they'll try something soon," he said, his voice steady but serious. "Yeah," Emma replied, her eyes narrowing as she gazed at the spot where the gang had vanished. "Razor's ego won't let him back down. He's going to come at us harder next time. He needs to save face in front of his crew." Grant nodded knowingly. Typical behavior for guys like him. They thrive on intimidation. Problem is, they've run into people who don't scare easily. Emma gave him a sidelong glance. "Exactly. We need to keep the pressure on. If they think there's any weakness, they'll push harder. We can't let that happen." As they spoke, a few of the townspeople cautiously approached from nearby storefronts and homes. They had been watching from a distance, their fear gradually giving way to curiosity and cautious hope. One man, wearing a work vest with a hardware store logo, cleared his throat nervously. Miss Sullivan," he asked hesitantly. Who are these folks? I mean, no offense, but they don't look like the sheriff's deputies." Emma turned to face him, her expression softening slightly. "They're friends," she explained. "Veterans. They're here to help keep the town safe." "Veterans?" The man's eyes widened in surprise. He glanced toward the line of riders still stationed around the street. "I thought they were, I don't know, some kind of special task force." "In a way, they are," Grant said, stepping forward. He extended a hand to the man. "Major Grant Calloway, retired military. We're here to back up Emma and make sure no one else gets hurt." The man shook Grant's hand, his grip hesitant but respectful. "We've been dealing with those bikers for a while now," he said. "They've been shaking down businesses, scaring people. I didn't think anyone could stand up to them. Well, now they've got someone standing in their way." Emma replied firmly. "But it's going to take more than just us. We'll need the town's support to keep them out for good." The man nodded, a spark of determination flickering in his eyes. "You've got it. Just tell us what to do." With a quiet smile of appreciation, Emma nodded back before turning her attention to Grant. "Let's regroup. We need to plan for their next move." Later that afternoon, the veterans gathered in the town square, their bikes parked in a neat row. Grant addressed the group, his voice low but commanding. They listened attentively, accustomed to his leadership. "We've sent a message," Grant began. "But that was the easy part. Razor's going to come back. And when he does, he'll bring more men. We can't afford to be caught off guard. Emma stepped forward to add her input. We're not just defending this town. We're showing Razor and his gang that Falcon Creek isn't their playground. We'll be ready for them. But we're not here to provoke a fight. If we can make them understand they've lost control, they'll look for an easier target. One of the veteran riders, a tall man with a scar running along his jawline, crossed his arms. What if they don't back down? Guys like that don't always take the hint. Then we'll handle it, Grant said firmly. The last thing we want is violence. But we won't let them push us around. If it comes to that, we'll neutralize the threat quickly and cleanly. The group murmured their agreement. These were men and women who had faced far worse than a gang of bikers. They knew how to handle high-pressure situations with discipline and precision. All right, Grant continued. Pair off and patrol the main roads leading into town. Stay visible but non-confrontational. Let them see that we're ready. The riders nodded and began dispersing to their assigned positions. Emma watched them go with a mixture of pride and resolve. This was what true strength looked like, not empty bravado, but quiet, unwavering readiness. As dusk approached, Razor and a smaller group of his men returned. This time on foot. They didn't enter the heart of the town but loitered at the edge of the square, observing the veterans from a distance. Razor's expression was tense. His jaw clenched as he watched the calm, organized movements of Grant's team. His gang members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly shaken by the sight of so many disciplined riders. Emma stepped out from the diner, walking purposefully toward the square. Razor's gaze locked onto her immediately, his fists clenching at his sides. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he called out as she approached. Emma stopped a few feet away, her posture relaxed but alert. No, Razor. You're the one making it harder on yourself. Walk away before you dig yourself into a hole you can't climb out of. Razor sneered, though the expression lacked conviction. You think you've won just because you brought some backup? This isn't over. It is if you want it to be. Emma countered. You can save yourself a lot of trouble by leaving now. Or you can stay and learn the hard way that you're out of your league. Grant appeared beside her, his presence adding weight to her words. He crossed his arms and stared Razor down. This isn't Kandahar, Grant said quietly. But we know how to deal with threats just the same. You've got a choice to make. Razor. Choose wisely. The gang leader hesitated, clearly torn between pride and self-preservation. For a long moment, the tension crackled in the air like a live wire. Finally, Razor took a step back, his expression dark with frustration. You haven't seen the last of me, he muttered. Emma didn't flinch. I'll be here when you come back. But next time, don't expect any mercy. With that, Razor turned on his heel and stalked away, his gang following reluctantly. The veterans watched silently as they retreated into the night, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. The confrontation was over for now. But Emma knew this was just the beginning. Razor's pride had been wounded, and he wouldn't let that go easily. But with the veterans standing beside her, she was ready for whatever came next. Falcon Creek had drawn its line in the sand. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The veterans gathered in the town hall late the following day. Despite the tension that hung in the air, the space was filled with quiet determination. Emma stood near the front, flanked by Grant Calloway and several other veteran riders. Across from them sat Peter and a few town council members. The Iron Fangs were absent, but their presence still loomed over the room, unspoken but not forgotten. Grant stepped forward, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "We need to talk about how we're going to handle the situation with the gang. Razor Cross isn't going to walk away quietly. But this doesn't have to end in violence." One of the council members, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, frowned. "I don't see how it doesn't. Those bikers have terrorized this town for months. You saw what happened the other day. They only understand force." Emma cut in smoothly. "Force isn't the only thing that works. We're not saying we won't defend the town if we have to. But we're offering a different solution first. A solution that could end this for good." The council members exchanged skeptical glances. Peter leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of solution are we talking about?" Grant met his gaze directly. "A rehabilitation program," he said simply. "We've run similar programs for veterans who've struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Many of those men and women were lost, angry, and stuck in cycles of violence. But they turned their lives around when someone gave them a chance." The council member who had spoken earlier shook his head. "You're comparing them to veterans? These guys aren't soldiers. They're criminals. Some of them are veterans," Emma said quietly. "And the ones who aren't? They're still human. People like Razor built their power on fear because they've never been shown another way. But fear can only take you so far." Grant nodded in agreement. "If we offer them a path out, one that involves taking responsibility and rebuilding their lives, some of them might take it. And if they do, it'll weaken Razor's hold on the rest of the gang. He relies on their loyalty and fear. If that cracks, he loses control." A moment of silence followed as the council absorbed his words. Peter finally broke it. "So, how would this work?" Grant stepped forward, addressing the entire room. "We'd offer those who want to leave the gang a place in the program. They'll have to meet conditions, work training, counseling, and community service. There will be no handouts and no leniency for anyone who refuses to change. If they step out of line, they're out of the program and will face legal consequences." Emma added, "This isn't about sympathy. It's about giving them a choice, change or face the full weight of the law. Some of them might surprise you." The council members murmured among themselves. One woman, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "And if they don't take the offer, what happens then?" "Then we'll be prepared," Emma said firmly. "If Razor refuses to back down, we'll defend the town. But this gives us the chance to end things before it comes to that." Peter tilted his head thoughtfully. "You're banking on some of them wanting redemption." "I've seen it before," Grant replied. "People can surprise you when you give them an opportunity to change." The room fell silent again. Finally, the council members nodded in reluctant agreement. They knew the risks. But they also knew that fighting the gang head-on would bring consequences of its own. The opportunity for redemption came sooner than expected. That evening, Emma received word from one of the town's residents that a group of Iron Fangs members had been seen loitering near the town's outskirts. Emma and Grant rode out to meet them, accompanied by 2 other veterans. They found the gang members near an abandoned gas station, their bikes parked in a loose circle. One of them, Nate Ghost Johnson, stepped forward as Emma dismounted her bike. "Emma Sullivan, right?" Ghost asked, his voice cautious but not hostile. "That's me," she replied, keeping her posture neutral but alert. "What can I do for you?" "Ghost?" He glanced back at the others before speaking. "We heard about the offer. The program. Some of us, we're interested." Grant stepped forward, crossing his arms. "You sure about that? This isn't a way to dodge responsibility. If you're serious, There's going to be a lot of hard work ahead. We get that, Ghost said. Look, not all of us are on board with what Razor's been doing. Some of us are tired of it. We've got families to think about. We want out. Emma nodded slowly. If you're serious, then you'll get a fair chance. But there's no turning back once you commit. You'll be held accountable for everything you do from here on out. Ghost nodded in return. Fair enough. The other gang members murmured their agreement. They weren't all hardened criminals. Many of them were men and women who had joined the gang out of desperation or a lack of other options. The chance to escape that life meant more to them than they could express. We'll get you started, Grant said. But understand this, the moment you step out of line, you're done. We'll make sure you face the consequences. We understand, Ghost replied quietly. The next few days saw a gradual shift in Falcon Creek's atmosphere. Word spread quickly about the rehabilitation program, and more Iron Fangs members began coming forward. The veterans worked closely with the new recruits, guiding them through training sessions and counseling. It wasn't an easy process. Years of bad habits and mistrust didn't vanish overnight, but it was a start. Emma observed the changes with cautious optimism. For every gang member who committed to the program, there were still others loyal to Razor. The fight wasn't over, but the cracks in Razor's control were becoming more visible. Peter watched the transformation from afar, often seated on a bench near the diner. One evening, he spoke to Emma as she joined him. You're giving them a chance, he said softly. That's more than most people would. They deserve that chance, Emma replied. But they also have to earn it. Redemption isn't free. No, it's not, Peter agreed. He smiled faintly. But you're doing the right thing. Emma nodded, her gaze shifting to the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. For the first time in a long while, Falcon Creek didn't feel weighed down by fear. The town was beginning to heal, one small step at a time. The atmosphere inside Razor's makeshift clubhouse was tense and fractured. What had once been a place of brotherhood and bravado now felt hollow, the weight of recent events bearing down on every member. Razor paced near the large, graffiti-covered table in the center of the room, his footsteps heavy and agitated. He had been brooding ever since the veterans had shown up, and his frustration was only growing. They think they can push us around? Razor muttered under his breath, slamming a fist onto the table. They think a few old war heroes can make us back down? Around him, the gang members exchanged uneasy glances. The fearsome aura that Razor had relied on for so long was starting to waver. Doubts were creeping in, though no one dared to voice them, at least not directly. Nate Ghost Johnson leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression distant. He wasn't alone in his thoughts. Several of the younger members were questioning their loyalty, and Ghost had felt the shift in the group's dynamic ever since the veterans arrived. The veterans hadn't come in with threats and bluster, they had stood their ground with quiet strength, and it had shaken the gang to its core. Razor's voice snapped Ghost out of his thoughts. You've been quiet, Ghost, Razor said, narrowing his eyes. Got something to say? Ghost hesitated for a moment but then pushed off the wall, standing straight. Yeah, I do, he replied calmly. I think we're heading down a dead-end road. The room fell silent. Several gang members shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Ghost and Razor. Razor's jaw tightened as he stepped closer to Ghost. A dead-end road? Razor echoed, his voice low and dangerous. Explain. Ghost met Razor's gaze without flinching. Look around, Razor. Things have changed. The town isn't afraid of us anymore. Those veterans aren't just some random bikers. They've got discipline, experience, and the town backing them. We can't win this fight. Razor scoffed, shaking his head. You're scared. That's what this is. You're letting them get in your head. It's not fear, Ghost said evenly. It's reality. If we keep pushing, this is going to end badly, for all of us. A ripple of agreement passed through the room, though no one dared to speak aloud. Razor noticed the subtle shift and his temper flared. He pointed an accusatory finger at Ghost. You think walking away is going to solve anything? They'll come after us anyway. We have to show them who's in charge. By doing what? Starting a war in the middle of town? Ghost countered. Look, I'm not saying we roll over and let them run things. But maybe it's time to think about a different path. They're offering a way out, one that doesn't end with us in handcuffs or worse. Razor's eyes narrowed dangerously. You're buying into that redemption crap? You really think they care about us? Ghost shrugged. They care about protecting the town. And if that means giving some of us a second chance, then yeah, I think they're serious. It's better than what we've got now. The room remained tense. The gang members caught between two forces. Razor represented the old ways, power through fear and intimidation. But Ghost's words resonated with those who were tired of living in constant conflict, always looking over their shoulders. Another voice spoke up from the back of the room. Ghost's got a point, said Marcus, one of the younger members. I've got a kid. Man, I'm tired of all this. I don't want him to grow up thinking this is the only life. Razor turned sharply toward Marcus, his eyes blazing. Oh. So you're turning soft now too? You think they're gonna just forgive everything we've done? No, Marcus replied quietly. But maybe it's worth trying. I'm done with this cycle. Razor. You can't scare people forever. Eventually, someone stands up to you. Razor's fury boiled over, and he slammed a fist into the nearest wall, causing a few of the others to flinch. You want out? Fine. Go. See how far you get without this crew backing you. Ghost stepped between Razor and Marcus before things could escalate further. Enough, he said firmly. You don't own us. Razor. We're all in this together, or we're not. You keep talking like you're the only one who gets to call the shots. But that's not how this works. Razor glared at him, his fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, it seemed like he might lash out. But instead, he took a step back and sneered. Fine. You want to play it your way? Go ahead. But don't come crawling back when it blows up in your face. Ghost didn't respond. He knew there was no point in arguing further. Razor was too blinded by his need for control to see the truth. Ghost turned and nodded to Marcus and a few others. Let's go, he said simply. Several gang members hesitated, then followed Ghost out of the clubhouse. The tension in the room lingered like a cloud as Razor watched them leave, his mind racing with anger and paranoia. He could feel his grip on the gang slipping, and it terrified him more than he was willing to admit. Outside, Ghost and the others mounted their bikes. The cool evening air was a welcome relief after the suffocating tension inside the clubhouse. Ghost took a deep breath and glanced at Marcus. You good? He asked. Yeah. Marcus replied with a nod. It's just hard. You know? I've been with this crew for years. I know. Ghost said quietly. But sometimes you've got to walk away to find something better. They started their engines, the sound echoing through the empty streets. Ghost led the group toward the edge of town, where the veterans had established their temporary base. It was a symbolic move, leaving behind the old life and heading towards something uncertain but hopeful. When they arrived, Emma and Grant were waiting for them. Emma stepped forward, her expression calm but curious. Decided to take the offer? She asked. Ghost nodded. Yeah. We're ready to give it a shot. Grant exchanged a glance with Emma before addressing the group. It won't be easy, he warned. But if you're serious, we'll support you. We are, Marcus said firmly. We just want a chance to build something better. Emma smiled faintly. You've got it. Let's get started. The small group dismounted their bikes, the weight of their decision settling over them. It wasn't just about leaving the gang, it was about confronting their pasts and taking responsibility for their futures. For the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of purpose that didn't rely on fear or violence. The cracks in the Iron Fangs had deepened, and change was finally within reach. But whether that change would hold or collapse under pressure remained to be seen. For now, they were willing to take the first step. Marcus Cross leaned back in his chair. His sharp eyes narrowing as Razor explained the situation. The meeting was taking place at a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of a nearby town. A neutral ground where gang leaders occasionally gathered to discuss territory disputes and alliances. Tonight, however, the focus was on Falcon Creek and the unexpected resistance the Iron Fangs had faced. They had a whole team of veterans. Razor muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. They're organized. They've got the town on their side. Marcus tapped his fingers on the table, the rhythmic sound echoing through the room. Unlike Razor, Marcus had a reputation for being more strategic. He didn't rely solely on intimidation, he understood the value of calculated moves. His silence made Razor increasingly uncomfortable. You let a bunch of ex-soldiers scare you off, Marcus finally said, his tone low and measured. You had the whole town under your thumb, and now it's slipping away because you didn't plan ahead. Razor bristled. It wasn't that simple. These guys aren't amateurs. They've got military training, and they're not afraid to push back. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And you didn't think to call me sooner? Razor averted his gaze, muttering something under his breath. Marcus sighed and leaned forward. All right. We'll fix this. But if you want to keep your position, you need to get it together. No more excuses. Marcus stood and addressed the other gang leaders in the room. This isn't just about the Iron Fangs anymore. These veterans are setting an example. If they succeed in pushing us out of Falcon Creek, it won't stop there. Other towns will start thinking they can do the same. That's bad for all of us. A few murmurs of agreement spread through the group. Marcus had a knack for uniting rival gangs under a common threat. He knew how to manipulate their fear of losing control over their territories. We need to send a message, Marcus continued. We're going to make Falcon Creek understand that defying us has consequences. But we'll do it smart. No reckless attacks. We'll hit them where it hurts. And we'll do it together. One of the gang leaders, a burly man known as Crusher, crossed his arms. You really think they'll just back down if we put some pressure on them? They won't have a choice. Marcus replied with a cold smile. They might be tough, but they're not invincible. We've got numbers on our side. We'll make them second-guess every step they take. Satisfied with Marcus's plan, the gang leaders began discussing logistics, how many men they could mobilize, what resources they had available. Razor remained silent, stewing in his resentment but knowing he needed Marcus's help to regain control of the situation. Meanwhile, back in Falcon Creek, the atmosphere grew increasingly uneasy. The veterans had noticed signs of surveillance, unfamiliar vehicles parked on side streets, strangers lingering near key areas like the diner and town hall. Emma and Grant exchanged worried glances as they patrolled the streets on their motorcycles. They're scouting, Grant said quietly, pulling up beside Emma near the town square. Marcus's people. Most likely, They're getting a feel for our defenses. Emma nodded grimly. They're preparing for something bigger. We need to be ready. We will be, Grant assured her. We've got patrols rotating around the clock. They won't catch us off guard. Despite his confidence, both of them knew the stakes were higher than ever. The townspeople were growing anxious, whispering rumors about rival gangs and impending attacks. Connie, the diner owner, voiced her concerns during a brief meeting that evening. Emma, people are scared, she said, wringing her hands nervously. We've never dealt with anything like this before. I don't know how much more we can take. Emma placed a reassuring hand on Connie's shoulder. I get it. But we're not alone in this. The veterans are here to help. And we've got a plan. We just need the town to stay strong. Connie sighed but nodded. I'll do what I can to keep people calm. Just be careful. Okay? I will. Emma promised. As night fell, Marcus and a small contingent of his men arrived at the outskirts of Falcon Creek. They parked their motorcycles on a hill overlooking the town, their engines rumbling softly before cutting off. Marcus dismounted and surveyed the scene below. He could see the faint glow of streetlights and the silhouettes of veteran riders patrolling key intersections. They've got a good setup, Marcus muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Disciplined. But discipline can be broken. One of his lieutenants, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, approached. What's the plan, boss? We make them uncomfortable, Marcus replied. Start small, vandalism, intimidation tactics. We'll test their response and see how tight their defenses really are. Once we find a weakness, we exploit it. The lieutenant grinned. Sounds like fun. Marcus didn't return the smile. This isn't about fun. This is about control. We're going to show them that no matter how tough they think they are, they can't stop us. As he spoke, Razor approached hesitantly. You really think this will work? It will if we stick to the plan, Marcus said firmly. Follow my lead, and you'll get your town back. Razor nodded reluctantly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. He knew Marcus was a different kind of leader, ruthless and methodical, but part of him wondered if even Marcus had underestimated the veterans. For now, the gangs prepared to execute their strategy. The tension in Falcon Creek was palpable. A storm gathering on the horizon. The town's fate hung in the balance. And everyone, veterans, gang members, and townspeople alike, braced for what was to come. As dawn broke over Falcon Creek, the town began to stir with an uneasy tension. While the streets appeared quiet on the surface, the residents were increasingly aware of the changes happening around them. Strange vehicles had been seen parked in inconspicuous places, and unfamiliar faces had appeared near local businesses. It was clear that the town was under observation. Marcus Cross was moving his pieces into place, preparing for the next phase of his plan. Emma Sullivan rode her motorcycle down Main Street, her eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual. Grant Calloway joined her near the edge of the square, his face set in a grim expression. They're making their presence known, Grant said without preamble. We've had a couple of scouts circling the warehouse district and the diner. They're not being subtle about it either. They're testing us, Emma replied, trying to see how we'll react. They want to make us nervous. Grant nodded. And the town's starting to feel it. Connie called me this morning, said some of her regulars are talking about leaving town until things settle down. Emma's jaw tightened. We can't let that happen. If the town starts to empty out, Marcus wins by default. We need to keep morale up. Agreed, Grant said. But we also need to be ready for the next step. Marcus won't stop with scouts. He'll escalate soon. Emma glanced toward the hills that surrounded the town. The peaceful landscape felt deceptive now, hiding the dangers that lurked beyond its borders. She knew that Marcus wouldn't wait long before making his move. The gangs under his command were restless and eager to prove their dominance. Later that day, Marcus ordered the first wave of provocations. His men, disguised as drifters and bikers passing through, spread out across Falcon Creek. They vandalized buildings, smashed windows, and spray-painted gang insignias on walls. In one particularly bold move, they defaced the town's veteran memorial, a sacred landmark for many of the residents. The news spread quickly, anger and fear rippling through the community. By the time Emma and Grant arrived at the scene, a crowd had already gathered near the memorial. Townspeople murmured anxiously, their frustration evident. "This is going too far," an elderly man muttered angrily. "We can't just let them do this. They're trying to intimidate us," Emma said as she dismounted her bike. She walked toward the vandalized memorial, examining the crude symbols painted across its surface. The sight stirred something deep within her, an anger she kept carefully controlled. "But we're not going to give them the reaction they want." "How can you say that?" a younger man in the crowd demanded. "They're tearing the town apart, and we're supposed to just stand by and watch." "We're not standing by," Grant interjected, stepping forward. "We're responding strategically. If we rush into a fight, we'll play right into their hands. Marcus wants us to escalate. He's looking for an excuse to turn this into a full-scale conflict." Emma nodded in agreement. "We'll clean this up, and we'll make sure they don't get the satisfaction of seeing us panic. But we'll also be prepared. If they cross the line again, we'll be ready." The crowd murmured in reluctant agreement. Emma knew it wouldn't be easy to keep the town calm, but she also knew they couldn't afford to lose control. Falcon Creek's strength lay in its unity, and Marcus was trying to fracture that. Meanwhile, Marcus watched the situation unfold from a safe distance. One of his lieutenants approached him with a smug grin. "The vandalism's got them riled up. Word is the whole town's on edge." "Good," Marcus said. "Fear is a powerful tool. Keep the pressure on. I want them second-guessing everything." "And the veterans?" the lieutenant asked. Marcus's eyes hardened. "They'll crack eventually. They might have discipline, but everyone has a breaking point. We just have to keep pushing until we find it." The lieutenant nodded and left to relay the orders. Marcus remained where he stood, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew this game well: create fear, erode trust, and watch the opposition crumble from within. It had worked before, and he was confident it would work again. As the day wore on, Emma and the veterans coordinated their response. They organized patrols to keep an eye on key areas and reinforced the town's defenses without making it appear overly militarized. The goal was to maintain a sense of normalcy while staying alert to any threats. Emma met with Peter Sullivan and a few other town leaders at the diner that evening. The tension in the room was palpable, but Peter's calm presence helped steady the conversation. "People are scared, Emma," Peter said. "They're looking to you and the veterans for guidance." "We're doing everything we can," Emma replied. "But we need the town to work with us. If we let fear take over, Marcus wins. Then we need to show them that we're stronger than fear." Peter said thoughtfully, "Actions speak louder than words. The more people see us standing firm, the more they'll believe in our ability to protect them." Emma nodded. "You're right. We'll organize a town-wide cleanup tomorrow. Let's show Marcus that we're not afraid of him." The next morning, the residents of Falcon Creek came together to restore the vandalized areas. Families, business owners, and veterans worked side by side, repainting walls and repairing broken windows. The cleanup effort became a symbol of resilience. A clear message to Marcus and his men: Falcon Creek wasn't backing down. Marcus received word of the cleanup later that day. His expression darkened as he listened to the report. "They're pushing back," his lieutenant said. "They won't for long." Marcus replied coldly. "We'll hit them harder next time. Let's see how strong their unity really is." But deep down, Marcus knew the battle for Falcon Creek would not be as simple as he had expected. The town was stronger than he had anticipated, and the veterans had created a foundation of trust and courage that wouldn't be easily broken. Still, he was determined to break them, no matter the cost. The storm was far from over. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The town hall was packed. Residents of Falcon Creek filled every available seat, with others standing at the back or lining the walls. Conversations buzzed in anxious whispers as people discussed the recent surge in vandalism and intimidation tactics. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud, reflecting the deep fears that had taken hold of the community. Emma Sullivan stood near the front, her arms crossed as she surveyed the crowd. Peter sat beside her, his expression calm but watchful. Across from them were several veterans, including Grant Calloway and Nate "Ghost" Johnson, who had come to address the growing unrest. The mayor, a middle-aged woman named Annette Harper, stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone, calling for silence. "All right, everyone, let's get started," she said firmly. The room gradually quieted, though the tension remained palpable. Annette took a deep breath and continued. "We all know why we're here," she said. "The situation in town has escalated. Marcus Cross's people have been stirring up trouble, and we've seen an increase in vandalism and intimidation. Understandably, many of you are worried. We need to discuss how we're going to move forward." She glanced toward Emma and nodded. "Emma, would you like to speak?" Emma stepped forward, her boots echoing softly against the polished wood floor. She adjusted the microphone, letting her gaze sweep over the crowd. Many faces were filled with apprehension, while others showed a simmering anger. "I know you're scared," Emma began, "and I understand why. Marcus Cross and his gang are trying to make you feel helpless, like you have no control over what happens next. But that's not true. You're not powerless. We're not powerless." A man near the back stood abruptly, his face flushed with frustration. "Easy for you to say," he snapped. "You've got military experience. You've got those veterans backing you. What do the rest of us have?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "You have us," she replied. "We're here to stand with you, to protect this town. But we can't do it alone. We need you to trust us, to work with us. Marcus is trying to divide us, and if we give in to that fear, he wins." The man crossed his arms but sat down, grumbling under his breath. Another resident, a woman with a tense expression, spoke up. "What about those gang members you're working with? The ones who were part of the problem? How do we know they won't turn on us?" The room murmured in agreement, and all eyes turned toward Ghost, who stood quietly near the side of the stage. He hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. The weight of their distrust was tangible, but he had expected this reaction. "I get it," Ghost said, his voice steady but low. "You don't trust us. I can't blame you. We were part of the problem, and we caused a lot of pain in this town. But some of us want to make things right. That's why we joined the program. We're not asking for forgiveness overnight. We're asking for a chance to prove that we've changed." "Why should we believe you?" someone called out. Ghost took a deep breath. "Because I've been where Marcus's men are now, angry, lost, looking for a way to feel powerful. But that path doesn't lead anywhere good. The veterans showed me that there's another way. And I'm trying to walk it. We all are. But we need your help to keep going." His words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. A few members of the crowd shifted uncomfortably, clearly moved but unwilling to fully let go of their doubts. Emma decided to build on Ghost's message. "Redemption isn't just about the people who seek it," Emma said. "It's about the community that chooses to give them a chance. If we turn our backs on those who are trying to change, we become part of the problem. But if we stand together, we can break this cycle of violence and fear." A silence followed her statement, broken only by the creak of a wooden bench as someone leaned forward to speak. It was Tom Wilson, the owner of the local hardware store, whose business had been vandalized the previous week. He cleared his throat and addressed the room. "I'll admit, I was skeptical about this whole program," Tom said. "But one of those guys, Stryker, I think, came by the store a couple of days ago. He helped clean up the mess his crew made. And he didn't ask for anything in return. He just wanted to help. That's more than I expected." His words carried weight, and the murmuring in the room shifted in tone. It was no longer purely distrustful, there was a glimmer of hope in the air. "Look," Tom continued, "I'm not saying it's going to be easy. But I think maybe we should give them a shot. If they're willing to put in the work, the least we can do is give them the chance to prove themselves." Emma nodded gratefully at Tom, then turned back to the crowd. "That's all we're asking for, a chance. No one's pretending the past didn't happen. But we have an opportunity here to build something better. It's up to us to take it." Mayor Harper stepped forward again, taking control of the discussion. "Thank you, Emma. And thank you, Ghost. I know this is a lot to process. But I think we all need to remember that this town is strongest when we stand together." The crowd remained quiet, processing everything that had been said. Slowly, heads began to nod in agreement. While not everyone was convinced, a sense of cautious optimism began to spread through the room. "We'll need volunteers for patrols and cleanup efforts," Mayor Harper continued. "If you're willing to help, please sign up before you leave tonight. We'll also be holding more meetings to keep everyone updated on the situation." The meeting gradually came to a close, with residents forming small groups to discuss what they had heard. Some still voiced doubts, but others expressed a willingness to give the program a chance. It was a small but significant step toward healing the fractures in the community. Emma and Ghost stood near the exit, watching as people filed out of the hall. Peter joined them, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You made an impact tonight," Peter said softly. "Maybe," Emma replied. "But this is just the beginning. We've got a long road ahead." Ghost nodded in agreement. "Yeah. But at least now we've got more people walking it with us." As the last few residents trickled out of the hall, the veterans exchanged determined glances. The fight for Falcon Creek's future was far from over. But tonight had shown that unity and redemption were possible. Now, they had to keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The quiet streets of Falcon Creek were suddenly alive with tension as reports of disturbances spread through the town. Overnight, Marcus Cross's men had ramped up their provocations. Windows were smashed at several businesses. Graffiti marred public buildings. And a hardware delivery truck had been set ablaze in an empty lot. It wasn't just random vandalism, it was a calculated attack designed to shake the town's trust in the veterans and the reformed gang members. Emma Sullivan was already on the scene by the time the fire department extinguished the flames. The charred remains of the delivery truck smoldered behind the hardware store as a crowd of onlookers gathered. Whispered accusations rippled through the crowd. "Probably one of those ex-gang members," someone muttered. They're pretending to change. But this is who they really are. Emma's jaw clenched as she overheard the comment. She knew Marcus was using fear to erode trust in the rehabilitation program. It was a psychological tactic designed to make the town turn against those who were trying to reform. She needed to shut it down quickly. Grant Calloway approached her, his face grim. We've got another report, graffiti at the diner. Same gang symbols as before. Marcus is stepping things up. Emma said. He's trying to make people believe the reformed guys are still part of the problem. Grant nodded. We need to get ahead of this. If the town loses faith in the program, it'll fall apart. Emma glanced around the crowd and spotted Nate Ghost Johnson standing near the edge of the lot. His posture tense. He had been working hard to prove his loyalty to the town. But this latest incident was putting everything at risk. Emma made her way over to him. You all right? She asked quietly. Ghost shook his head. This is exactly what Marcus wants. He's trying to pin this on us. I know. Emma replied. But the town's scared. We have to show them that you're not the same people who used to run with Razor. Ghost exhaled slowly. Yeah. But some of these folks aren't going to believe that no matter what we do. They will. Emma said firmly. We just have to keep pushing forward. Later that afternoon, a meeting was held at the Veterans Community Center. The room was filled with reformed gang members, veterans, and a few town leaders. The tension in the air was palpable as Emma addressed the group. Marcus is trying to undermine everything we've built, she said. He knows that if he can turn the town against you, it'll weaken our defenses from within. We can't let that happen. One of the reformed members, Stryker, crossed his arms and spoke up. How are we supposed to stop him? He's got guys pulling this crap all over town. And people are already blaming us. Grant stepped in. We stay visible. We show the town that we're here to protect it, not harm it. Patrols will be increased. And we'll respond to any incident quickly. But more importantly, you need to stick to the path you've chosen. No retaliation. No violence. If you lose your cool, Marcus wins. Stryker nodded reluctantly. All right. But what if they come at us directly? Then you call us. Emma said. We handle it together. No one fights alone. Ghost stepped forward to address the group. Look. I know it's not easy. A lot of people still see us as the enemy. But we've come too far to let Marcus drag us back. We have to show them that we're not the same people we used to be. The room fell silent as Ghost's words sank in. Slowly, the reformed members nodded in agreement. They knew the stakes. And while the temptation to lash out was strong, they also knew that doing so would destroy everything they had worked for. The next few days were tense but relatively quiet. Patrols were increased, and the veterans coordinated closely with local businesses to ensure they felt protected. However, the pressure continued to build. Marcus's men were still active, and rumors of more planned attacks kept the town on edge. Late one night, Ghost received an anonymous tip that a group of Marcus's men was planning to stage an ambush near the abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. He immediately contacted Emma and Grant. And within minutes, a team was assembled to investigate. When they arrived at the gas station, they found several motorcycles parked near the entrance. Emma signaled for the team to spread out and move in cautiously. As they approached, a voice called out from the shadows. Well, look who decided to show up, a man sneered. Stepping into the dim light, it was one of Marcus's lieutenants. A wiry man with a scar across his face. We're not here to start a fight, Emma said calmly. But we won't let you intimidate this town. The man chuckled darkly. Intimidate? We're just here to have a little fun. You can't stop what's coming. Sullivan. Marcus owns this town now. Not yet. Emma replied evenly. And he never will. The lieutenant smirked but didn't push further. Instead, he signaled to his men, who mounted their bikes and roared off into the night. Emma exhaled slowly as the sound of engines faded into the distance. They're testing us, Grant said quietly. Let them. Emma replied. We'll be ready. The next morning, the town woke to a surprising sight. The reformed gang members had gathered at key locations around Falcon Creek, cleaning up vandalized areas and repairing broken property. Ghost and his team worked tirelessly, scrubbing graffiti off walls and helping business owners rebuild. It was a coordinated effort to show the town that they were committed to change. Connie, the diner owner, watched from her window as Ghost and Marcus helped repaint the exterior of her building. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. We did, Ghost replied. We're part of this town now. We want to make things right. Connie hesitated for a moment before nodding. Thank you. As the cleanup efforts continued, more townspeople began to pitch in. The symbolic gesture wasn't lost on anyone. The sight of former gang members working alongside veterans and residents sent a powerful message. Falcon Creek was united against fear and intimidation. Emma observed the scene with a mixture of pride and relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, there were still doubters and tensions to navigate, but progress was being made. The cracks Marcus had tried to exploit were beginning to heal. Later that day, Peter approached Emma as she stood near the town square. You did good, he said quietly. We all did, Emma replied. But this isn't over. Marcus is still out there. No, Peter agreed. But he's losing ground. And the more the town comes together, the harder it'll be for him to break us. Emma nodded. One step at a time. As the sun set over Falcon Creek, the town felt different, stronger, more resilient. Marcus's plan to divide them had failed. And the people of Falcon Creek were proving that redemption and unity were not just words but a way forward. The veteran riders, town leaders, and reformed gang members gathered in the community center as Grant Calloway unrolled a map of Falcon Creek on the large meeting table. Emma Sullivan stood beside him, her gaze sharp and focused. The tension in the room was thick, but there was also a sense of purpose. Everyone knew what was at stake. Grant tapped the map with a marker. These are our critical points: Main Street, the diner, the hardware store, and the town hall. If Marcus makes his move, he'll target these places first. We need to fortify them, Emma added. Reinforce windows and doors, block off access points, and secure escape routes. We can't leave any weak spots. Tom Wilson, the hardware store owner, leaned forward. I've got plenty of lumber and tools at the store. You'll have what you need by tonight. I can handle the diner, Connie offered. It's practically a second home for most folks around here. If anything happens, it'll be a central gathering point. Grant nodded. Good. We'll set up patrol rotations. Veterans will handle the perimeter. But we'll need help from everyone to keep watch inside town limits. Count me in, Stryker said, crossing his arms. We've got a lot to prove. And we're not going to let Marcus tear this place apart. Emma glanced at Ghost, who nodded silently in agreement. Despite the reformed gang members' rough pasts, their commitment to protecting the town was clear. They had come too far to let Marcus undo everything they had worked for. As word spread, townspeople began organizing in small groups, each assigned to different tasks. At the hardware store, volunteers loaded wooden planks, nails, and other materials onto trucks to be distributed around town. Emma oversaw the efforts with Ghost and Marcus, ensuring every key location was fortified. "You ever think we'd be doing something like this?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and determination. "Not in a million years," Ghost replied. "But here we are." Nearby, a group of teenagers helped carry supplies, guided by veterans who taught them how to build barricades and reinforce structures. The scene was a testament to how far the town had come. Residents who had once been divided by fear were now working side by side to defend their home. "Keep it steady," Emma called out as a team raised a large wooden barrier near the diner's entrance. "We need it strong enough to hold." The volunteers complied, their movements careful but efficient. Ghost walked over and handed Emma a wrench. "Looks like people are starting to trust us." Emma gave a faint smile. "Trust is earned, and you've all been earning it." As the day wore on, the community continued to pull together. Business owners provided food and first aid kits, while others donated blankets and emergency supplies in case people needed shelter. The hardware store became a hub of activity, with Tom Wilson directing volunteers like a general on a battlefield. That evening, Emma gathered everyone at the town square to deliver a speech. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the crowd. She stepped up onto a makeshift platform, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the residents. "Marcus Cross wants us to believe that we're weak, that we can't stand up to him. But he's wrong. Look around you, look at what we've accomplished together. This isn't just about defending buildings or streets. It's about protecting each other. About showing Marcus that fear has no place in Falcon Creek." The crowd murmured in agreement, a wave of resolve passing through them. Emma continued, "Everyone here has a role to play. Whether you're patrolling the streets, reinforcing defenses, or supporting those on the front lines, you are part of something bigger. This town is our home, and we're not going to let anyone take that from us." Applause broke out, and Emma stepped down from the platform. Peter approached her, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "You've always had a way with words," he said with a small smile. "Let's hope they're enough," Emma replied. As night fell, the preparations continued under the glow of floodlights and lanterns. The streets were quieter now, but the sense of urgency hadn't faded. Peter found a moment of solitude near the diner, reflecting on how much the town had changed since he first moved there with Emma. Despite his blindness, he could feel the energy around him, the footsteps of people moving with purpose, the sound of tools clanging, and the low murmur of voices. Emma joined him after a while, sitting beside him on a bench. "You all right, Dad?" she asked softly. "I am," Peter replied. "Just thinking about how far we've come. It's different, fighting a battle like this. No weapons, no uniforms, just people trying to protect what matters." Emma nodded. "It's not so different in some ways. The stakes are just as high." Peter turned his head slightly toward her. "You've done good, Emma. You've given these people hope." "Maybe," she said. "But Marcus isn't going to back down easily. We still have a fight ahead of us." Peter reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You'll be ready. You always are." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the town bustling around them. Despite the looming threat, there was a quiet strength in the air, a sense that Falcon Creek was united in a way it hadn't been before. At the Veterans Temporary Command Post near the town square, Grant reviewed the patrol schedules one last time. He exchanged nods with the veteran leaders, each of them fully aware of the task ahead. They had seen their share of battles, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about tactics or strategy, it was about defending a way of life, Let's get some rest, Grant advised the group. We'll need our strength for whatever comes next. The veterans dispersed. Though few of them intended to sleep, they knew the importance of staying sharp, especially with the threat of an imminent attack hanging over them. By the time midnight rolled around, the final preparations were complete. Barricades were in place, patrols were active, and communication lines between key locations had been established. Falcon Creek was as ready as it could be. Emma stood on the roof of the town hall, surveying the darkened streets below. Ghost joined her, his expression pensive. "It's quiet," he said. "Too quiet," Emma replied. "Marcus is waiting for the right moment. But when he comes, we'll be ready." They stood together in the silence, the weight of their responsibilities pressing down on them. The calm before the storm stretched on, every second bringing them closer to the confrontation they knew was inevitable. Scouts returned to the command post early the next morning with reports of increased activity around the outskirts of Falcon Creek. Marcus's men had been seen gathering near the old lumberyard, just beyond the eastern hills. The information was troubling but not unexpected. The town's defenders knew Marcus was preparing for an attack. Now it was a matter of timing. Emma Sullivan listened quietly as one of the scouts finished his report. Grant Calloway nodded thoughtfully before addressing the group of veteran leaders around the table. "They're probing," Grant said, "trying to figure out where our weak points are. We need to tighten patrols around the eastern and southern edges. That's where they'll test us first." Emma crossed her arms, her gaze hard. "We can't spread ourselves too thin. Though, if we overcommit in one area, Marcus could hit us somewhere else. We need to stay flexible." "Agreed," Grant replied. "We'll keep rotating patrols, but we'll reinforce critical points like the diner and the hardware store. If they make a move, those are likely targets." The leaders nodded in agreement. Emma glanced at Ghost and Marcus, who stood quietly near the back of the room. The reformed gang members had been fully integrated into the town's defense efforts, but their presence still drew suspicion from some of the veterans and townspeople. As the meeting concluded, Emma pulled Ghost aside. "How are your guys holding up?" she asked. "Mostly all right," Ghost replied. "But some of them are starting to feel the pressure. They're worried that if something goes wrong, the town's going to turn on us." "They won't," Emma assured him. "Not if we stay the course. You've earned a lot of trust over the past few weeks. Don't let Marcus take that away from you." Ghost nodded slowly. "Yeah. We'll hold the line. We've come too far to let him pull us back." Later that day, tensions flared at one of the construction sites near the town square. A group of reformed gang members was helping to reinforce a barricade when a resident confronted them. The man, a local mechanic named Jack, was visibly agitated. "I don't care how much you've changed," Jack snapped. "You and your friends brought this trouble to our doorstep. My family's scared out of their minds because of you." Stryker stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Look, I get it. We made a lot of mistakes, but we're trying to fix them. We're here to protect this town. Same as you." Jack scoffed. "You think that makes everything okay? Just like that?" "No," Stryker said quietly. "It doesn't. But what else do you want us to do? We can't change the past, but we can stand with you now. That's what we're trying to do." The confrontation drew a small crowd, and Emma arrived just in time to defuse the situation. She stepped between Stryker and Jack, her voice firm but calm. "Enough," she said. "We're all on the same side here. Marcus is the enemy, not each other. If we let fear divide us, we've already lost." Jack hesitated, his anger slowly giving way to uncertainty. Finally. He gave a reluctant nod and walked away. Emma turned to Stryker and the others. You handled that well. Keep your cool. We can't afford to let things spiral. Stryker exhaled deeply. Yeah. It's just hard. You know? People don't forget. They don't. Emma agreed. But they do learn to forgive, if you give them a reason to. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Falcon Creek's defenders made their final preparations. Patrol rotations were adjusted to cover high-priority areas, and backup plans were reviewed. The atmosphere was tense but determined. Everyone knew the assault was coming, it was just a matter of when. At the diner, the veterans gathered with the reformed gang members and town leaders for a final briefing. Emma stood at the front of the room, her gaze sweeping across the faces of those assembled. By now, you all know what's at stake, she began. Marcus is coming. He's counting on fear to weaken us, to break our unity. But we've already proven that we're stronger than that. We've stood together through everything he's thrown at us. And we'll keep standing. Peter Sullivan spoke next. His voice calm but resolute. This town has seen tough times before. We've faced loss and hardship. But we've never given up. Tonight, we show Marcus that Falcon Creek doesn't bow to threats. Grant followed with a few tactical reminders, emphasizing the importance of communication and discipline. Stick to the plan, he said. No one acts alone. If you see something, report it. We've got each other's backs. The crowd murmured in agreement. Ghost and Marcus exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about defending the town, it was about proving to themselves and others that they had truly changed. As the meeting dispersed, Emma found herself alone outside the diner, staring up at the stars. The quiet night felt almost surreal, given the tension that gripped the town. Peter joined her after a few minutes, his presence grounding her. You're thinking about tomorrow, he said softly. Yeah, Emma admitted. There's a lot that could go wrong. Peter nodded thoughtfully. There always is. But you've done everything you can to prepare. The rest is out of your hands. I know, she said. It's just, this town means everything to me. I don't want to see it torn apart. Peter placed a hand on her shoulder. It won't be. Because you won't let it. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the town fading into the background. Despite the looming threat, there was a sense of quiet strength in the air, a reminder that Falcon Creek was more than just buildings and streets. It was a community, bound by shared struggles and hopes. As midnight approached, the final patrols reported in. The streets were eerily quiet, but no one let their guard down. Emma, Grant, and the other leaders took one last walk through the town, checking the fortifications and speaking with those on duty. This is it, Grant said as they returned to the command post. We're ready. Emma nodded. Let's hope Marcus realizes that before it's too late. But deep down, she knew that hope wouldn't be enough. The storm was coming, and they would have to weather it together. Falcon Creek had prepared for battle. Now, all they could do was wait. A deafening explosion shattered the quiet of Falcon Creek. The blast came from the southern edge of town, near the old supply depot, sending a column of fire and smoke into the night sky. Alarms blared as Emma Sullivan and Grant Calloway rushed to the command post, their radios crackling with reports of multiple incidents. They've started, Grant muttered grimly, tightening his grip on his radio. Emma nodded, quickly assessing the situation. They're hitting several locations at once, classic distraction tactics. We can't let them split us up. A scout burst into the room, panting. Fires near the diner and the hardware store. We've also got movement near the town hall. They're trying to encircle us. Get the fire trucks to the diner, Emma ordered. We'll send reinforcements to the hardware store and hold the line at the town hall. Stick to the plan. The scout nodded and dashed off. Emma turned to Grant. We need to get moving. They're testing us. But we can't afford to let them gain any ground. Grant agreed. Let's rally our teams. We've got this. The first wave of attackers moved swiftly, targeting key points around town. At the hardware store, a group of Marcus's men attempted to breach the barricades. But the defenders were ready. Tom Wilson and a team of veterans crouched behind sandbag fortifications, armed with makeshift weapons and non-lethal deterrents. Hold your positions, Tom shouted as the attackers advanced. A hail of smoke bombs and flashbangs erupted from the defenders' side, disorienting the attackers. Veterans moved in with precision, using tactical formations to drive the gang members back. The attackers stumbled, unable to penetrate the defenses. At the same time, near the diner, Ghost led a team of reformed gang members who had stationed themselves at the main barricade. The sound of roaring engines and shouted orders echoed through the streets as Marcus's men made a hard push. They're coming in fast, one of the defenders called out. Stay calm, Ghost instructed. We've trained for this. Focus on containment. The attackers roared forward. But the defenders didn't panic. Ghost and his crew reinforced the barricade just as the first wave of attackers reached it. A brief scuffle broke out as the gang members tried to break through. But the reformed men fought with discipline and restraint. Nearby, a fire broke out in one of the side alleys. Fire trucks rolled into position, their sirens cutting through the chaos. Volunteer firefighters worked quickly to contain the blaze, preventing it from spreading to nearby buildings. The sight of the coordinated response seemed to unsettle Marcus's men, who hadn't expected such a well-organized defense. Emma arrived at the hardware store just as the attackers regrouped for another assault. She quickly assessed the situation and joined Tom at the barricades. How are we holding up? She asked. We've managed to keep them out so far, Tom replied, wiping sweat from his brow. But they're not giving up. They won't, Emma said. Marcus is counting on us to get overwhelmed. We need to keep the pressure on them. Grant arrived moments later with a small reinforcement team. We've got backup stationed at the town hall, he reported. They'll hold the line there. Let's make sure this side holds too. The next wave of attackers came with more force, using improvised weapons and motorcycles to ram the barricades. The defenders braced themselves as the assault intensified. Smoke filled the air, and the sounds of metal clashing against wood echoed through the streets. Despite the chaos, the defenders held their ground. Emma moved between positions, shouting orders and offering support where needed. Stay together. Don't let them push through. A gang member managed to climb over part of the barricade, but Ghost tackled him before he could cause any damage. The two struggled briefly before Ghost subdued the attacker and handed him over to the veterans for detainment. You good? Emma asked as Ghost rejoined the line. Yeah, he said, catching his breath. They're desperate. They didn't think we'd be this ready. That's exactly why we'll win, Emma replied. Across town, at the diner, Connie watched nervously from inside as the battle raged outside. She could see Marcus's men circling, looking for weaknesses in the defenses. Several townspeople had taken refuge in the diner, their fear evident in their wide eyes and tense postures. Are we going to be all right? One woman asked anxiously. Connie forced a reassuring smile. We will. The veterans and patrol teams have everything under control. Just stay inside and keep calm. Outside, the sound of gunfire echoed faintly in the distance. though the defenders were careful to minimize lethal force. Their goal was not to escalate but to repel the attackers using tactical superiority. Firefighters continued to move between locations, extinguishing small fires that Marcus's men had set in an effort to cause panic. At the town hall, another group of defenders held firm. Marcus's men had attempted to infiltrate through the back entrance but were met with resistance. Grant's team coordinated a counteroffensive, using strategic flanking to trap the attackers in a narrow corridor. Forced into retreat, the attackers left behind weapons and supplies, a sign of their growing desperation. Emma received updates from all fronts through her radio. Despite the intensity of the attack, the town was holding. "They're scattered," she said to Grant as they regrouped at the command post. "Marcus is losing control. He'll double down," Grant warned. "He won't accept defeat that easily." "Let him," Emma said with a determined glare. "We'll be ready." As the first wave of attacks subsided, a brief lull settled over the town. Smoke drifted lazily through the streets, and the distant sound of sirens faded into the background. The defenders took a moment to catch their breath and regroup, knowing that the next assault could come at any moment. Ghost approached Emma near the barricades. "They'll be back soon," he said. "Probably with heavier force." "I know," Emma replied. "But we've already shown them that we won't be intimidated. We just need to keep pushing forward." The defenders repositioned themselves, reinforcing barricades and checking supplies. Despite the weariness in their eyes, there was a renewed sense of confidence among the townspeople. They had faced the first onslaught and emerged stronger for it. As night deepened, Emma stood at the center of the town square, surrounded by those who had chosen to defend Falcon Creek. The battle was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next. The storm had begun, but the resolve of the town remained unbroken. The brief lull ended with another explosion near the east barricade. Emma Sullivan heard the blast from her position near the town square. Her radio crackled to life as one of the scouts reported in. "Multiple attackers approaching from the eastern sector. They've breached the outer barricade near the diner." Emma grabbed the radio. "Hold your positions. Reinforcements are on the way. Don't let them push through." The battle was escalating as Marcus Cross's men regrouped for a more determined assault. At the diner, Ghost and his team braced themselves. The attackers were more organized this time, moving in coordinated waves. Ghost spotted one of Marcus's lieutenants directing the charge and knew they were in for a hard fight. "They're coming in fast," one of the reformed gang members shouted. "Get ready," Ghost barked. "Remember your training. We're holding this line." The gang members advanced with motorcycles roaring, their headlights cutting through the smoke-filled air. They crashed into the barricade, some leaping off their bikes to engage the defenders. Ghost and his crew fought with precision, using non-lethal tactics to disable their opponents. The reformed gang members, many of whom had once fought alongside Marcus's men, now stood shoulder to shoulder with the town's protectors. One attacker managed to climb the barricade, but Marcus, the reformed gang member, intercepted him. They grappled briefly before Marcus shoved the man back over the barricade. The effort earned him a nod of approval from Ghost. "Nice work," Ghost said, catching his breath. Marcus grinned. "I'm not letting these guys ruin what we've built." The firefight intensified, but the defenders held their ground. Veterans and townspeople reinforced the barricades, making it increasingly difficult for Marcus's men to gain any ground. Meanwhile, at the hardware store, Grant Calloway led a counteroffensive. The attackers had tried to set up a temporary base in an abandoned building across the street, but Grant's team quickly flanked them. Using tactical maneuvers, they cut off the attackers' escape routes and forced them into a defensive position. Push forward, Grant commanded. We need to drive them out of this sector. The defenders advanced methodically, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. The attackers, disoriented and outmaneuvered, abandoned their position and fled into the night. Grant's team secured the area, clearing the building of any remaining threats. Emma's voice came through Grant's radio. Status report? We've driven them back from the hardware store. Grant replied. No major damage. How's the diner? Still holding. Emma answered. They're putting up a fight, but Ghost and his team are keeping them at bay. Good. I'm sending a few reinforcements your way just in case. Copy that. Grant turned to his team. All right. Let's move. We're not letting them regroup. Back at the diner, the fight reached a critical point. One of the attackers managed to ignite a small fire near the barricade, causing panic among some of the younger defenders. Ghost quickly took charge. Don't lose focus, he shouted. Put out that fire and hold the line. Several townspeople rushed forward with extinguishers, dousing the flames before they could spread. The coordinated effort steadied the defenders, and they regained their composure. Ghost noticed the attackers starting to falter. Marcus's men hadn't expected this level of resistance. Emma arrived moments later, her presence boosting morale. She quickly surveyed the situation and joined Ghost at the barricade. They're weakening, she said. We can push them back if we stay organized. Yeah. They didn't plan for this kind of defense. Ghost agreed. But they're stubborn. They won't give up easily. Emma nodded and signaled for the defenders to prepare for a counterstrike. We're going to push them toward the main street, she announced. Grant's team will cut them off from the other side. Let's end this. The defenders regrouped and launched a coordinated push. Ghost and Emma led the charge, driving the attackers back step by step. Veterans moved with tactical precision, using cover and flanking maneuvers to outmatch the attackers' brute force. The turning point came when the attackers lost their forward momentum. Caught between the barricade and advancing defenders, they began to retreat. Several of Marcus's men abandoned their bikes and ran for cover, realizing that the battle was slipping out of their control. Fall back, one of the attackers shouted. They've got us surrounded. The remaining attackers scattered, leaving behind weapons and supplies in their haste to escape. The defenders held their ground, ensuring that no stragglers could regroup. As the smoke began to clear, the sounds of combat faded. The defenders took a moment to catch their breath, their eyes scanning the streets for any signs of lingering threats. Fire trucks arrived to extinguish the remaining fires, and medics tended to the wounded. Emma leaned against a barricade, wiping sweat from her brow. Ghost approached her, his face tired but determined. They're pulling back, he reported. We've got them on the run. Emma nodded. We've turned the tide. But it's not over yet. Marcus might have something else up his sleeve. Let him try. Ghost said. We'll be ready. Townspeople began emerging from their homes and shelters, cautiously approaching the defenders. Connie stepped out of the diner, her eyes wide with relief. You did it, she said quietly. You held them off. We all did. Emma replied. This town stood together, and that's why we're still here. The crowd began to gather around the defenders, offering words of gratitude and support. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of hope in the air. The tide had turned, and Falcon Creek was no longer a town living in fear. Emma took a deep breath, knowing that the final confrontation with Marcus was still ahead. But for now, they had won a crucial victory. The town had proven that it could stand strong in the face of adversity, and that strength would carry them through the battles to come. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the now quiet streets of Falcon Creek. Emma Sullivan led a team of veterans and reformed gang members toward the town's eastern edge, where reports indicated Marcus Cross and his remaining men were regrouping. Their retreat had been hasty, but Marcus wasn't the type to give up without a fight. Emma knew he'd make one final stand. As they approached the abandoned lumberyard, flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating scattered debris and overturned motorcycles. Marcus's men stood in disarray, their confidence shattered after the coordinated defense had outmaneuvered them. Marcus himself stood near a rusted truck, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Emma stepped forward, her posture calm but commanding. "It's over. Marcus. You've lost. Call off your men before more of them get hurt." Marcus sneered, though the fire in his eyes flickered with uncertainty. "You think I'm just going to walk away? After all this? You don't have a choice," Grant Calloway said, stepping up beside Emma. "Your people are done. They're tired of fighting a losing battle. If you keep pushing, you'll end up alone." Several of Marcus's men exchanged uneasy glances, their resolve clearly shaken. The loyalty he had once commanded was crumbling before his eyes. Emma noticed the shift and pressed further. "Look around you," she said. "Is this really how you want it to end? You keep fighting, and you're only going to drag everyone down with you. Walk away now, and you might still have a chance to rebuild." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Marcus clenched his fists, his gaze darting between his men and the defenders standing across from him. He was a man who thrived on control and intimidation, but neither tactic was working anymore. Slowly, the tension began to break as one of his lieutenants stepped back, signaling the others to lower their weapons. "Boss," the man said hesitantly. "She's right. We're outnumbered and outmatched. This isn't worth it." Marcus glared at him but saw the truth written on his men's faces. They were done following him down this path. With a bitter snarl, he finally relented. "Fine." Marcus spat. "We're done here." He turned to leave, motioning for the rest of his crew to follow. The scattered remnants of the gang retreated into the shadows, leaving Falcon Creek behind. Emma exhaled slowly, the weight of the confrontation lifting from her shoulders. Grant placed a hand on her arm. "We did it." "Yeah," she replied quietly. "But this isn't just about winning a battle. We have to make sure it doesn't happen again." As dawn broke, the residents of Falcon Creek emerged from their homes, surveying the damage with cautious hope. Fires had been extinguished, barricades were being dismantled, and patrols continued to sweep the area for any remaining threats. Despite the chaos of the night, the town had held strong. At the diner, a small crowd gathered to thank the defenders. Connie handed out coffee and pastries to the tired but victorious teams. Ghost and Marcus, the reformed gang member, stood near the entrance, accepting handshakes and words of appreciation from townspeople who had once feared them. "You guys really stepped up," Tom Wilson said, clapping Ghost on the shoulder. "I won't forget that." "Neither will we," another resident added. "You've earned your place here." Ghost nodded, emotion flickering across his face. "Thanks. It means a lot." Nearby, Emma and Peter watched the interactions unfold. Peter smiled faintly. "Looks like things are finally turning around." "They are," Emma agreed. "People are starting to believe in change. It's a good sign." "Because of you," Peter said softly. "You gave them something to believe in." Emma shook her head. "It wasn't just me. Everyone played a part. This town came together when it mattered most." Peter squeezed her hand gently. "Still, you should be proud. Later that day, a gathering was held in the town square. Mayor Annette Harper addressed the crowd, her voice steady and filled with pride. "Last night, we faced one of the greatest threats this town has ever seen," she began. "But we didn't face it alone. We stood together, veterans, reformed members, business owners, and residents alike. Because of that unity, we prevailed. Falcon Creek is stronger today than it has ever been." The crowd erupted in applause. Emma felt a swell of emotion as she stood among the people she had fought to protect. This victory wasn't just about survival, it was a testament to the power of redemption and resilience. Grant stepped forward to say a few words, emphasizing the importance of staying vigilant but also celebrating the progress they had made. "The battle may be over," he said, "but the real work is just beginning. We've proven that change is possible. And now we have to keep building on that foundation." After the speeches concluded, the crowd dispersed to continue cleanup efforts and repairs. Despite the exhaustion, there was a renewed sense of purpose in every step the townspeople took. They had faced their darkest hour and come out stronger on the other side. As evening approached, Emma found a moment of peace near the veteran memorial. She traced her fingers over the names etched into the stone, a silent tribute to those who had sacrificed before her. Ghost joined her, his expression contemplative. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he asked. "Yeah," Emma replied. "It does. We've got a long way to go." Ghost continued, "But I think we've proven that we belong here." Emma smiled softly. "You have. And you've earned every bit of it." They stood in comfortable silence, the weight of the night's events slowly fading. Falcon Creek was no longer a town gripped by fear, it was a community reborn, united by the strength of its people. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The aftermath of the battle spread like ripples across Falcon Creek. As the morning sun rose higher, its warm light reflected off the debris scattered across the town. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air, but most of the fires had long been extinguished. Marcus Cross's defeat was not yet complete, but his influence had been shattered. Many of his men, shaken by the failed attack, had either fled or were detained by the veterans and local authorities. At the abandoned lumberyard, Marcus sat on a fallen log, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and exhaustion. He knew the truth, he had lost. The plan he had so confidently orchestrated had crumbled under the coordinated defense of the town. His men no longer looked to him with fear or loyalty. They stood at a distance, quiet and uncertain, waiting to see what would happen next. Emma Sullivan arrived at the lumberyard with Grant Calloway and a team of veterans. The atmosphere was tense but calm, the immediate threat having passed. Marcus barely acknowledged their presence as they approached. He stared at the ground, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and failure. "You're out of options, Marcus," Emma said firmly. "Your men have either surrendered or walked away. The only thing left for you to decide is what happens next." Marcus slowly lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Emma. "What's the point? You're just going to lock me up, right? That's how this works." "Not necessarily," Grant interjected. "We're offering you the same chance we gave the others, a chance to change, to build something better. It's your call." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm going to buy into that redemption nonsense? I've been running things my whole life. People like me don't get second chances." "People like you?" Emma repeated, taking a step closer. "People like you make mistakes, just like everyone else. But you don't have to keep making them. You can choose something different." "You really believe that?" Marcus challenged. "After everything I've done?" I do, Emma said without hesitation. I've seen people come back from worse. It's not easy, but it's possible. The only question is whether or not you're willing to try. Marcus fell silent, her words sinking in deeper than he cared to admit. He glanced over at Ghost, who stood quietly to the side, watching the exchange. Ghost had once been one of Razor's most trusted enforcers. But now he was part of something much bigger, something stronger than the gang loyalty they had once relied on. You used to be like me, Marcus said, narrowing his eyes at Ghost. How'd you pull it off? It wasn't just me, Ghost replied. I had people who gave me a chance, who showed me there was a different way to live. I had to take responsibility for my past, but I also had to believe I could be something more. You could do the same if you stopped being so damn proud. Marcus gritted his teeth but said nothing. He knew Ghost was right. His pride had driven him to this point. And it was that same pride that now kept him from accepting the truth. He looked around at the few remaining men who still lingered nearby. They were watching him with weary eyes, waiting for his next move. They weren't loyal to him anymore, they were simply waiting to be free of this mess. After a long pause, Marcus stood and took a deep breath. All right, he said quietly. I'll give it a shot. But I'm not making any promises. That's all we need, Emma replied. The rest will be up to you. Grant stepped forward, signaling to the other veterans to secure the scene. We'll take you and your men to the community center. You'll get started in the program immediately. Just remember, if you mess around or go back to your old ways, you're out. No second chances on that front. Marcus nodded stiffly. He still carried his doubts. But for the first time in years, there was a flicker of something else, something that might have been hope. Later that day, Falcon Creek began the long process of recovery. The town square, which had been a battleground just hours earlier, was now filled with townspeople working together to rebuild. Windows were repaired, debris was cleared, and walls were repainted. The sight of reformed gang members working alongside veterans and residents sent a powerful message: the town was healing. At the community center, Marcus and his men were formally introduced to the rehabilitation program. They sat in a large meeting room as Grant outlined the program's requirements: job training, counseling, and community service. Marcus listened with mild skepticism, but he couldn't deny the sense of structure and purpose that the program offered. It was a far cry from the chaos and fear that had defined his life for so long. Emma observed from the back of the room, her arms crossed as she quietly took in the scene. She knew this was only the beginning. Marcus and his men had a long road ahead of them, and not all of them would make it through. But the fact that they were here, willing to try, was a victory in itself. Later that evening, Peter Sullivan found Emma near the Veteran Memorial once again. She was deep in thought, reflecting on the events of the past few days. Still thinking about the fight? Peter asked gently. Yeah, Emma admitted. It's hard to believe it's finally over. Peter nodded. Battles like this leave scars. But they also leave something else: strength. You've helped this town find that strength again. I just hope it lasts, Emma said. Marcus is going to be a tough case. He's got a lot of demons to face. Maybe, Peter replied. But redemption doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. And sometimes, the first step is the hardest part. Emma smiled faintly. You always know what to say, don't you? Comes with age, Peter said with a chuckle. They stood together in the fading light, the town quiet and peaceful around them. For the first time in a long while, Falcon Creek felt truly safe. The threat had passed, and the bonds forged in the fire of conflict would continue to strengthen over time. The journey toward healing and redemption had only just begun. But for the people of Falcon Creek, the future was no longer something to fear, it was something to build. Together. Falcon Creek awoke to a new beginning. The streets that had once echoed with fear were now filled with the sound of rebuilding. Hammering, laughter, and conversation replaced the chaos of battle. The town's scars remained, but they no longer defined the community. Instead, they served as reminders of the strength and resilience the people had discovered in themselves. At the hardware store, Tom Wilson supervised a group of volunteers repairing the building's front facade. Among them were Marcus and several of his former gang members. Tom watched as Marcus worked diligently, lifting beams and securing new window frames. The tension that had once defined their interactions was noticeably absent. "You're getting the hang of it," Tom remarked, handing Marcus a fresh batch of nails. "Yeah. Well," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I figure it's time I did something useful for once." Tom chuckled softly. "Keep this up, and you might just have a future in construction." Marcus gave a small, almost sheepish smile. He wasn't used to receiving encouragement, especially from someone he had once terrorized. But here, in this moment, he felt something unfamiliar: acceptance. It wasn't full forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Nearby, Ghost helped a young teenager paint over graffiti that had been left on one of the town's walls. The two worked in comfortable silence for a while before the boy spoke up. "My dad used to be scared of you," the boy said matter-of-factly. "Now he says you're one of the good guys." Ghost paused, processing the words. "Your dad's a smart man," he finally said. "I wasn't always a good guy, but I'm trying to be now." The boy nodded. "He says that's what matters." Ghost smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess it does." At the community center, Emma Sullivan observed one of the ongoing counseling sessions. A mix of veterans and former gang members sat in a circle, sharing their experiences. The room was filled with stories of hardship and loss, but also of survival and hope. "Sometimes, coming home is harder than being in the fight," a veteran named Ben said, his voice steady but reflective. "You spend so long in survival mode that you forget how to just live." Several heads nodded in agreement. Marcus, sitting in the circle for the first time, listened intently. He had never served in the military, but he understood the feeling of being stuck in a cycle of fear and violence. It was all he had known for so long. Hearing others speak about their struggles made him feel less isolated, as if the weight he carried was no longer his alone. The counselor, a middle-aged woman with a kind but firm demeanor, encouraged the group to focus on small victories. "Healing isn't a straight path," she said. "It's about taking one step at a time. You're here, and that's already a big step." Emma quietly left the room, feeling a sense of pride for how far the program had come. Grant Calloway met her in the hallway, his expression thoughtful. "How's it going in there?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Emma replied. "Marcus is actually listening. I think he might have a shot at turning things around." "Good," Grant said. "He'll need all the support he can get. We've seen it before, some people can't handle the process and fall back into old habits. But others, they surprise you." Emma nodded. "Let's hope Marcus is one of the good surprises." Throughout the week, the former gang members continued to integrate into the town's daily life. They worked alongside veterans on community projects, repaired damaged properties, and helped organize town events. With each task completed, the walls of mistrust began to crumble. At the diner, Connie served lunch to a group of reformed members who had just finished reinforcing the playground near the elementary school. She placed plates of sandwiches and bowls of soup in front of them. Her smile warm and genuine. "You've all earned this," she said, patting one of them on the shoulder. The kids were thrilled to see their playground back in shape. "Thanks, Connie," Marcus said, grateful for the kindness. He hadn't expected the town to welcome him so quickly. But it was moments like these that gave him hope. He glanced around the room, noticing how the other patrons no longer stared at him with suspicion. It felt normal. Emma entered the diner and waved to Connie before sitting across from Marcus. "How's it going?" she asked. "Better than I thought it would," Marcus admitted. "People are actually starting to trust us." "That's because you've shown them you're serious," Emma replied. "Keep it up. Trust takes time. But you're on the right path." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah. I just hope I can keep it going." "You will," Emma said with quiet confidence. "You've already proven you're capable of change. Now it's about staying the course." One evening, the town held a ceremony at the Veteran Memorial to honor those who had fought to protect Falcon Creek. The entire community gathered, their faces illuminated by candlelight. Mayor Annette Harper stood at the podium, addressing the crowd with a mixture of pride and emotion. "This town has faced its share of challenges," she began. "But through it all, we have shown what it means to stand together. We've learned that healing doesn't come from forgetting the past, it comes from confronting it and choosing to build a better future." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several veterans stood at attention, their hands resting on the shoulders of their reformed comrades. It was a powerful image, one that spoke to the strength of unity and redemption. Emma stepped forward to say a few words. "This town has been through a lot," she said. "But we didn't give up. We fought for each other, for our home. And now, we get to keep fighting, not with violence, but with hope. Thank you all for standing with us." Applause filled the air as the ceremony concluded. People lingered afterward, sharing stories and reflecting on how far they had come. Ghost stood with Marcus near the memorial, both of them lost in thought. "You did good tonight," Ghost said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus replied, his voice softer than usual. "Still feels strange, though, being here. Like this. Give it time," Ghost said. "You'll get used to it." Marcus nodded. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't thought possible: peace. As the night deepened, Emma and Peter walked together through the quiet streets of Falcon Creek. The town glowed softly under the light of street lamps, a peaceful contrast to the chaos it had endured. "You proud of what we've built?" Peter asked. "I am," Emma said. "We've come a long way. And it's not just about what we've built, it's about who we've become." Peter smiled. "That's what real strength looks like. Not in what you can tear down, but in what you can rebuild." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "Thanks, Dad. You've always believed in me." "Always," Peter said softly. "And now, the whole town does too." Falcon Creek had transformed, not just in its physical structures but in the hearts of its people. The bonds forged through struggle and redemption would continue to grow, shaping a future built on resilience, trust, and hope. Together, they had proven that healing was possible and that no one had to walk the path alone. The success of Falcon Creek's transformation did not go unnoticed. News of the town's remarkable turnaround began to spread across neighboring counties. It wasn't long before other communities, facing their own challenges with gangs and disenfranchised veterans, reached out to learn more about what had become known as the Falcon Creek model. A delegation of community leaders from a nearby town arrived one afternoon to meet with Emma Sullivan, Grant Calloway, and the mayor. They toured the rebuilt streets, visited the community center, and spoke with some of the former gang members who had successfully turned their lives around. Marcus was among those who shared his story, though he was still grappling with his role as an example for others. "I'm not some kind of saint," Marcus told the visitors during a meeting at the community center. "I messed up a lot. But people here gave me a chance. And I finally decided to take it. That's the only reason I'm standing here right now." The delegation nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by his words. One of the visitors, a city council member from a struggling town, leaned forward. "How do you keep people committed to change?" she asked. "In my town, it feels like no one believes in second chances anymore." Ghost, who had been standing nearby, answered, "It's not just about giving people a second chance. It's about showing them how to earn it. You have to build trust. And that takes time. But you can't do it alone. You need the whole community to be part of the process." Grant added, "The key is accountability and support. People need to know they're not going to be abandoned. But they also need to understand that they have to take responsibility for their actions. We set clear expectations. And we stick to them." The visitors took notes and asked more questions. As the meeting continued, Emma felt a deep sense of pride. Falcon Creek's journey had been difficult, but it was now serving as a beacon of hope for others. Over the next few weeks, other towns began implementing elements of the Falcon Creek model. Veterans and former gang members volunteered to share their experiences, traveling to nearby communities to offer guidance. The program's structure, combining job training, counseling, and community service, was adapted to fit the needs of each town. Emma received letters and messages from people who had been inspired by Falcon Creek's story. Some were struggling with their own battles and found hope in knowing that change was possible. Others were community leaders seeking advice on how to foster unity and resilience. One evening, Emma sat on the porch of her father's house, reading through some of the letters. Peter joined her, settling into a chair beside her. "You've built something incredible here," Peter said quietly. "We all did," Emma replied, setting the letters aside. "It wasn't just me. It was everyone, veterans, reformed members, the townspeople. They believed in something bigger than themselves." Peter nodded. "That's the kind of legacy that lasts. It's not about the battles you fight, it's about the lives you change." Emma smiled softly. "You're right. And it feels good to know that what we did here is making a difference beyond Falcon Creek. You've shown people that hope isn't just a word," Peter said. "It's an action. And you've given them the tools to act on it." The sense of renewal in Falcon Creek was evident everywhere. The community center, once a symbol of division, now served as a hub for growth and support. Children played in the rebuilt playgrounds, their laughter filling the air. Local businesses thrived as residents worked together to create a stronger economy. The diner, as always, remained a central gathering place. Connie had expanded her menu and hired a few of the reformed gang members to help with the increased demand. Regulars and newcomers alike filled the booths, sharing stories and celebrating their progress. Marcus and Ghost often found themselves at the diner after long days of work. They had become unofficial mentors to some of the younger men in the program, offering advice and encouragement. Despite his initial resistance, Marcus had embraced the role, finding purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes he had made. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Marcus asked Ghost one evening as they sat at the counter. "Not in a million years," Ghost replied with a chuckle. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything now." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "It's weird, though. Sometimes I still feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like all of this is too good to be true." Ghost nodded thoughtfully. "I know what you mean. But we've earned this. Man. And we're going to keep earning it. One day at a time. Their conversation was interrupted by a group of teenagers who had just finished a volunteer project. They approached Marcus and Ghost with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "Hey," one of the teens said. "Is it true you guys used to be in a gang?" "Yeah," Marcus said. His tone serious but not defensive. "But that's not who we are anymore." The teen hesitated for a moment before smiling. "Well, thanks for helping rebuild the skate park. It means a lot." "No problem," Ghost replied. "Just keep out of trouble. All right?" The teens laughed and nodded before heading to their table. Marcus watched them go, shaking his head in disbelief. "Guess we're role models now," he said with a smirk. "Crazy world." Ghost agreed, grinning. The culmination of Falcon Creek's transformation came during a town-wide celebration. Mayor Harper organized the event to honor the efforts of everyone who had contributed to the community's renewal. The town square was decorated with lights and banners, and residents gathered to share food, music, and stories. Emma was invited to speak once more. She stood on the same platform where she had rallied the town during the darkest days of their struggle. This time, the mood was one of joy and hope. "Tonight, we celebrate how far we've come," Emma began. "But this isn't just about the battles we fought. It's about the choices we made, the choice to believe in each other, to stand together, and to build something better." She paused, letting her words sink in. "None of this would have been possible without every single person here. You showed courage when it would have been easier to give in to fear. You offered second chances when others might have given up. And because of that, Falcon Creek is stronger than ever." The crowd erupted in applause. Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of their support. As she stepped down from the platform, Peter met her with open arms. "You did it," he said softly. "We all did," Emma replied. As the celebration continued into the night, Emma found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The path had been filled with challenges, but it had also been filled with moments of connection and triumph. Falcon Creek's story was far from over, but it had become a story of hope, a legacy that would inspire others for years to come. The lights of the town glowed brightly, a testament to the strength of its people. Falcon Creek had transformed not just in its appearance, but in its spirit. And Emma knew that as long as they continued to believe in each other, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The legacy of change had been firmly planted. Now, it was time to nurture it and watch it grow. The people of Falcon Creek proved that redemption is possible, even for those who've lost their way. What does redemption mean to you? Share your thoughts in this story with others. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.